Wilbon and I do not bet on sports, so we wanted to talk to someone with a deep knowledge of the industry, maybe someone who serves as managing editor of the Vegas Stats and Information Network, which is why you are now looking live at Brent Musburger. Let's start
Brent,
this.
as we call him in Evanston, Tony.
So, Brent, 40 years ago on CBS,
Yes.
you were doing a segment every week with Jimmy the Greek that was the hottest thing on television that drove interest to the NFL. Why do you think the NFL and all sports have been nominally against gambling for all this time?
Well, first of all, Tony and Mike, it took the Supreme Court to bring us back together again. I used to be a regular on PTI. Listen, the reason why they have objected to it for so long is they didn't have a piece of the action. If it had provided revenue way back in the day, they would have jumped in. Listen, they started to move toward fantasy. They tried to sell that off as a skill game. And I noted this week after the Supreme Court decision came out, oh, yeah, so by the way, those fantasy sites are going to go all in on full-scale gambling on sporting events as it's about to become legal. The new owner of the Carolina Panthers, if you look at his hedge fund holdings, there are several major casinos in his holdings, I must point out.
Brent, to follow up on that, do you believe that the leagues are actually going to get their wish of a federal framework, federal approval of a cut on essentially every bet? Will the leagues actually get that?
Well, let's take one at a time. They have a chance to get federal regulation. Alito made that quite clear in the majority opinion issued by the Supreme Court. Whoever came up with the word integrity, I would advise them to go back again, because no one has cared more about the honesty of the games that people have been betting on here for decades in Las Vegas than the bookmakers. They're the ones who want the honest game. They're responsible for the integrity. The league should have been paying them, okay? Now, there are ways to share in the revenue, advertising, eventually, Mike and Tony, eventually, just as exists now in London, Sydney, and Melbourne, Australia, you will go into our biggest stadiums and there will be an exclusive betting kiosk where, yes, you can step up and make a wager on your favorite team before the game. Now, we're a long way from that, okay? We got to take a short step at a time. They will share in the revenue, but no casino is going to pay them off the top. Not going to happen.
So it was always so great that at the fourth quarter of a game, you'd always mention if somebody was near the spread. Or how did that touchdown affect the spread? Let me get to this. You told Sports Illustrated that the big increase will be in-game betting. Can you explain for people like me that don't really understand that, what is it going to look like in-game betting to the average fan?
Okay, here's what it'll look like, Tony. Let's take an example. The Cleveland Cavaliers and the Boston Celtics are going to go to Game 3 right now. That number is around 6.5. Cavaliers are favored over the Celtics. If you are an in-game bettor and you have your telephone and you're right there in your seat or in front of your television set, whatever the case might be, let's say that Boston jumps out, okay? And let's say that they take an immediate 10-point lead in the game. The algorithm, the computer will spit out what that spread should be, and suddenly the Celtics are favored. And if you believe, listen, the Cavaliers are coming back, LeBron James is going to have a great second half, you're going to bounce in and you're going to get better value on your bet with the Cavaliers. You have to move quickly. They changed the numbers. There are 3 ways right now to bet in-game. I mentioned the spread. There's also a money line and obviously the over-under betting total. In the UK, that is the growth area in sports.
Can you imagine a circumstance, for example, in a baseball game where the pace is really conducive to betting, that you could bet on a given hitter against a given pitcher in that moment?
Absolutely. No doubt about it. As a matter of fact, my introduction to betting on sports was in the bleachers of Wrigley Field. They thought I was going to class at Northwestern. Not so fast, not so fast. Mike knows I knew where the L was, okay? There were guys out there in the bleachers who taught me how to bet nickels, dimes, and quarters on every pitch. And absolutely, you will be able to bet on the outcome of the next. Baseball needs this more than any sport out there, okay? The younger generation, they will be attracted to this. They know the digital universe a lot better than I do.
Unbelievable. And to think I was going to class, Tony, how stupid was I for the most part. Brent, let's go back to something you touched on. What is this going to do to fantasy sports, and what is it going to do to mainstream media?
Let's take fantasy sports first. They're going to be damaged by this because living here in Las Vegas, I will tell you, being able, Mike, to bet on the outcome of a game is far more attractive than just picking out a couple of players. So their volume is going to suffer as a result of this. Now, the pregame shows are going to be covering this. The scrolls there where you are at ESPN, they'll start to roll the lines as they move. That's the best way to update what's happening with over-under and totals and just spreads on games. I would think that the NFL would make it quite clear to the announcers to lay off of it. And within time, Al Michaels will certainly be allowed to say, hey, that puts the total over with that touchdown in the last couple of minutes, things like that. But they'll be cautious, and they should be, going into. I would think that it would be up to the pregame shows to cover this. I think that the media, for the initial couple of years, they will talk too much about it because it's not the biggest thing out there. Most people are still pulling for their team, trying to win a championship. This is just part of the sports industry, not the biggest part.
I would get you out of here on this, and you've been so ahead of the curve after all these years. I would ask, what is the one thing that you need to do to be a successful sports bettor?
Lucky.
No.
Tony, I looked at the stats today. The UNLV does great research on betting on sports here in the state of Nevada. Believe it or not, the most vulnerable sport for the bookmakers is baseball, okay? That's where, if you study pitching patterns, and we have 5-inning bets, we have 1-inning bets, totals and that, you can. It's very hard to beat football, and it's very hard to beat basketball. Those are the two most popular sports to wager on. So if you really wanted to take a long look at making a career out of it, I would start to study baseball.